I get a lot of messages asking how I usually edit my photos. So today I'm gonna show you just the basic how I went from this basic image straight out of the camera to something like this. And yeah, so the program that I'm using is Adobe Lightroom Classic CC. um, I will you edit my photos 80% in Lightroom, and then other 20% in Photoshop if I wanna delete people from the photo, or maybe something like if I wanna take this light pose out just because it's distracting or anything like that. So yeah, so let's get started. When you import your photos into Lightroom, it's gonna import into the library. So um if you wanna edit a photo, you gotta go ahead, select, and just go to the above tab where it says develop. Go ahead and hit develop, and my first step before I edit or do anything with the photo is to go down below on the right hand side and go to lens correction and select these both of them, remove chromatic aberration and enable profile correction. It basically let the Lightroom know that which camera and which lens I used, and it'll use that information and remove the any it basically I'll have more dynamic range, and I can basically keeps more of the details. And then the second thing I'll do is, if I feel like if the image is a little bit tilt or not like straightforward, I'll go ahead and hit level. It'll level it, but I feel like I'm going to turn this off just because I feel like the photo is already leveled to me. So yeah, so I shot this on a cloudy day, it wasn't sunny, and I shot this at ISO 100 at 105 millimeter at f4. And yeah, so first thing I'm gonna do is basically drop down the highlights, basically all the way negative 100. And what this is basically is gonna bring out more of the details in the sky, and you can right now you can see that the image is really dark right now. So to bring it back up, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna up the exposure around 50.50, and I think this is a good starting point. I can always go back and play around with it more. Next thing I'm gonna do is down the contrast more. I know people like to up the contrast. I don't do that in my images. I always go down or just keep it 0. So I'm gonna go down to, let's say, to my negative 20-ish. And yeah, so this is basically your basic editing option. So next, we already did the highlights, which is all the way down. The next one is shadows. So I generally want to bring up the shadows a little bit, just to bring up more details in the rims, maybe in the grill area. So I'm gonna up the shadows just a little bit. I would say probably around 50 plus 50. That's a good starting point. And next up is whites. I don't usually touch the whites depending on how the image looked. Otherwise, most of the time I always leave the whites as 0, and I don't do anything to them. As far as the black, I'm gonna bring the black just a notch down, so just like negative 6.5 around there. And for clarity, I know that most of the people, when they're editing photo, they up the clarity. I do like it, but I don't up the clarity 100%. I try to keep it around 25 to 30 just to keep it more realistic, and it's it looks more natural rather than being like harsh. And yeah, so then next up I will put down the vibrance to negative 23ish and put down the saturation. And I know right now the image doesn't look colorful. That's because reason why I did these two in negative, because down below when we go to the HSL, from here we can choose what color we want to bring out of the image and how much we want to bring it out. So and yeah, so next option we have is a tone curve. So this is basically, a lot of people get confused on this part, is it's basically your highlights, your midtones and your shadows, and it's just playing around with both of them. So I'm gonna try to see where I can get this. So I'm gonna up the highlights a little bit, and midtones I'm gonna bring it down just a notch, and as far as the shadows I'm gonna up them a little bit. So I think that looks similar to what I'm going for right here. And let's just go back, and yeah, so next up we have the HSL. So I don't always touch the hue. That's something, if I wanna, I don't always touch the hue, so I always start with the saturation. So I'm gonna up the red, which is gonna bring out the red in the badge. And I do have a red pinstripe on my car, so it's gonna bring out that. Next up we have orange, which is gonna bring out the hue or the colors in the trees. And yeah, next up is yellow, which is gonna bring out more of the yellow from the tree. So my goal is I'm trying to go for a fall color, just because it's winter season. So I'm gonna try to make it a little bit like fall color, theme-ish color photo. Next up we have green. I'm gonna up those two. I'm gonna bring it down just a notch, not 100%. Next up we have aqua. Aqua doesn't doing that much, other than you can see at the windshield it just gets a little bit tint, but I'm gonna put those all the way down. The blue are basically your clouds, so you can see if I put it all the way up, it's gonna turn more bluish. But looking at the other image, I'm gonna go ahead and base by like +3, not that much. So next up I'm gonna go to luminance. So I'm gonna up the red, which is gonna basically pop more of the red from the whole image. Same thing with the orange and the yellow and the green. For green I'm gonna pop it a little bit less. Next up we have aqua. I'm gonna bring those down. And next up we have the blues, and I'm gonna bring these. I'm trying to match what I have at the other photos. So yeah, so this is gonna giving you guys a rough idea of what kind of process that I go through and edit the images. So down below, after the HSL, we have split toning, which I never use in my images. Next up we have detail. So I always go 100% on the sharp, and then what I do is, if you hold down option on your Mac and slide the bar, anything highlighted white is only gonna sharpen those parts. So if I have it right here, it's only gonna sharpen the lines on the cars and the outline of the trees, the buildings. But if I have it all at the bottom, it's going to sharpen everything, which I don't do that. So I always sharpen the up and then mask around like right here, which is I think is good. It's just going to sharpen up the edges and stuff. And for noise reduction, I always go 25-ish around there. I try not to go all the way up, just because if you go all the way up, you're going to lose a lot of the details. So I always try to stay around between 20 to 25-ish. You don't need to do anything with the color. We already did the lens correction, transform, and the effect. Effect is basically putting vignette on your images. If you go down, it's gonna put vignette, and it's the opposite side, but I never do vignette on my images. And this is the main part. I know a lot of people like the theme of having the teal and orange color, so this is where you can play around. So if I blue primary, if I go down, you can see the trees are turning like more orangish just because of this. So I'm gonna make this go down a little bit and try to play around, see what I feel like. And then yeah, I'm gonna up these, and then these are the yellows, so I'm gonna see what I think. I'm not gonna try and go down a little bit, up these, see what it's thinking. Okay, then as far as the red goes, it's not always like having the like I always play around with these, the last part, just to give it a different look than what I'm going for. So yeah, so this is basically what I do. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna crop the image a little bit. So I'm gonna have the car in the middle more, try to line it up, and I think that looks a little bit much better. So next up, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna bring out a little bit more the shadows from the rims, make it a little bit more pop. So I'm gonna go go down here and click on the brush tool. If you double click on your effect, it's gonna reset the whole bar. Then I'm gonna up the shadows by a little bit, and you're gonna go ahead and paint on your rim, and you'll see it'll make a change. So, and another tip is, if you go ahead and say show selected mask overlay, anything that's showing red, that means that's where you have painted. And then I'm gonna do the same thing on the back, and just paint. I'm gonna uncheck this so I can see what's making changes. So I'm gonna up the shadow a little bit more, go down in black, up the contrast by a little bit, and go up in clarity a little bit. I think that's a good kind of similar look what I'm trying to do on the other side. I'm gonna down the shadow by just a little bit, not too much. Yep, so next up we're gonna do is bring out the grill, the shadows on the grill. So what I'm gonna do is go ahead and hit the new. It's gonna basically go back and go ahead and hit the effect, and then which basically means it's gonna reset the whole brush. Go ahead and up the shadows a little bit and paint. And I know it's gonna paint the badge too, but I'll tell you guys a secret, and I'm gonna go ahead and paint the bottom. So what I'm gonna do is, if you hold down the option key, it's gonna show a minus, which means I'm gonna go ahead and unpaint the badge, which is do that. And let's see, go ahead and bring down the blacks, up the clarity, bring more shadows, up the contrast. Okay, so as you can see, we were here and we are here right now. And what I'm gonna do next is go ahead and brush the car So I'm gonna go ahead with the brush and up the highlight. Make the brush bigger by scrolling on your mouse pad. I'm gonna paint just a little. And I'm gonna go ahead and paint everywhere. Basically the whole car. And then what I'm gonna do next is, by holding the control, I'm gonna go around the car edges. Go ahead, minus the over editing that I did on the car. And I feel like I'm gonna have show good. Gonna do it one more time. Go ahead and unmask this. Unmask the grill. Just because I already did that. So, for the sake of the video purposes, I'm gonna do a rough. And I'm gonna go ahead and go ahead and unselect. Bring down the highlights a little bit. Okay, it's looking much better. Makes more pops out. And then what I'm gonna take the gradient filter. Double click on the effect. Up the clarity, down the exposure. I'm gonna bring it down from down below while holding down shift, and I'm gonna down the exposure more. The reason why I'm doing this is make sure I go to the car, and I'm gonna go ahead and hit done, and I'm gonna do the same thing from the top. But I'm gonna match the other one. Go ahead and do this exposure. So from here, this was the before, this is the after. Next up we're gonna do is focus on the headlights. I'm gonna go ahead and select the circular part. Draw a circle, go ahead and hit inward, bring down right there, and then up the exposure. This makes it the effect of giving the headlight is on. Next we'll go ahead and hit the brush, double click the effect, I'm going to up the exposure, and I'm going to paint the headlights and give them the effect that is on. And go ahead and just rough. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and okay, so go ahead done. And then the last thing, how I tinted the windows, are basically doing the same thing as taking the brush, double clicking on effect, down the exposure, and just like paint it in. You can make the brush smaller and do the same thing with the side window. And yep, and then what I do was I basically up the exposure to give the effect of, and then I'm gonna hold on control to take out any of the over mask around the windows. And down the shadow a little bit. So yeah, this was basically the final photo, and if I want to, I can go ahead and pull this into the Photoshop and go ahead delete the light poles in the back, but I'll do that in our next tutorial how I do that. And yeah, so this was, as you can see, this was the before, this is the after. Pretty basic, just your general tools. And yeah, and I'm gonna go ahead and export this and post it on my Instagram. And this is my final image, how it looked. And yeah, so see you guys next video with the new tutorial. Or if you guys have any questions, write them down in the comments below.